Mom, don't worry, I'll answer for you, Claire said before I could even open my mouth, her tone calm but commanding as if she had rehearsed every word. I sat in the sleek leather chair of Mr. Thompson's office, my hands folded neatly in my lap, heart steady even as my chest tightened slightly. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting narrow stripes of light across the polished mahogany desk where stacks of legal documents lay in perfect order, the air smelling faintly of coffee and paper. Claire's voice carried over the room, answering questions I had intended to speak for myself, her words precise, measured, almost rehearsed. I watched as the lawyer nodded along, jotting notes, barely looking up, and I realized that every answer she gave subtly shifted the focus away from me, redirecting the authority to her. My own words formed behind my teeth, waiting for a moment that never seemed to come, but I did not interrupt. I just sat there, listening, absorbing each phrase, each carefully placed inflection, feeling the familiar ache of invisibility stir in my chest. The clock ticked quietly, the only sound besides her voice, and I traced the edge of the table with my fingers, noticing small imperfections in the varnish, a reminder that this room, though immaculate, was still built by human hands. I recalled how my husband, now gone, had always insisted I understand the details of our estate, how he trusted me to speak up, to advocate for myself, yet here I was, silenced not by any law but by my own daughter, stepping confidently into my space. Claire's eyes met mine for a brief second, a flicker of something unreadable, perhaps satisfaction, perhaps unawareness, and then she returned to her narrative, as if I were a guest rather than the matriarch. The sunlight moved across the room, marking the slow passage of time, and I noticed how my reflection in the glass behind the desk showed a woman older, wiser, still composed, not yielding to panic or embarrassment. Each word from Claire was like a pebble dropped into a still pond, sending ripples that I felt but did not react to outwardly, my lips pressed together, my breathing even. I observed the lawyer shifting in his seat, glancing at me once, a subtle acknowledgement that he understood something I could not yet say. I remembered every subtle manipulation, every prior moment in family dinners, holiday gatherings, conversations about inheritances, the quiet ways authority had been tested, challenged, redirected, and now replayed here in high definition. I reminded myself that silence could be a strategy, that patience had its own power, that by letting her speak first, I was mapping her strengths, her patterns, her blind spots, collecting the narrative for my own understanding. My eyes scanned the certificates on the wall, the diplomas of the lawyer, the framed photographs of past clients shaking hands, and I felt the contrast between permanence and fleeting influence. Time passed in measured intervals, Claire maintaining her rhythm, her tone unwavering, occasionally glancing at me as if seeking permission or approval, though she would not admit she needed either. And I simply stayed put, composed, a quiet force in a room designed for dialogue and decisions, listening, remembering, understanding every nuance, knowing that this moment, though it seemed her domain, was mine to absorb and later act upon. The air shifted subtly as we moved from one topic to another, each question answered by her first, and each answer revealing something more about her intent, her approach, her understanding of leverage, and yet my own clarity only grew. I did not interrupt, I did not challenge, I simply let the words wash over me, storing each one, analyzing the rhythm, the priorities, the omissions, knowing that the power of observation was mine, and in that silence, I found a strange equilibrium, a patience born of years managing subtleties and misdirection, and as Claire continued, I realized that the act of listening, of withholding immediate reaction, was itself a demonstration of strength, one that the others in the room might not notice, but that I, Evelyn Harper, understood fully and would use when the time was right. The office was quiet now, the initial flurry of questions having passed, leaving only the low hum of the air conditioner and the faint rustle of paper as the lawyer adjusted a stack of documents. I remained seated, my posture straight, fingers lightly tapping the edge of my notebook, tracing invisible patterns, observing everything without interruption. Claire leaned back slightly in her chair, her expression measured, satisfied, confident in the narrative she had constructed. She had not yet noticed the small notebook in front of me, the one where I had begun jotting down every deviation, every emphasis, every carefully chosen word. My mind wandered briefly to the past weeks, the conversations at the dining table, the subtle ways she had maneuvered during family discussions, the gentle pressure to acquiesce to her choices, and I realized this pattern was not new. I took note of her tone, the inflection that suggested authority, the micropauses that revealed uncertainty or intention. Each moment she spoke without interruption was a piece of the puzzle, a map of influence I could follow later. I glanced around the room, noticing details previously overlooked, the small clock on the wall marking each second, the sunlight shifting as it streamed through the blinds, highlighting the slight wrinkles in the leather chairs, the polished sheen of the desk surface, all ordinary but grounding me in the reality of this space where power dynamics were quietly shifting. Claire occasionally glanced toward the lawyer, her eyes flicking like a conductor ensuring every note in her performance was received accurately. I remained silent, aware of how my non-reaction gave her the illusion of control while in truth I was cataloging every gesture, every phrase. The lawyer's pen scratched across paper, capturing facts, yet I sensed his occasional glances in my direction, subtle acknowledgments that he understood my presence was not passive, that my observation mattered. I recalled conversations with my late husband about patience and measured responses, the wisdom in knowing when to speak and when to let others reveal themselves. I observed Claire's mannerisms, the way she leaned forward slightly when confident, the small hesitation before she addressed certain questions, the careful shaping of her answers to anticipate objections, all of which I recorded silently in my mind and in notes, a growing dossier of behavioral evidence. As time passed, the rhythm of dialogue continued, Claire dominating the flow yet unintentionally revealing the structure of her reasoning, the hierarchy she assumed existed. I sat with a quiet resolve, the weight of years of experience lending clarity to my perception, understanding that influence was not always exerted loudly, that patience and observation could yield as much, if not more, than immediate confrontation. I allowed her to proceed, recording internally, cataloging externally, letting each moment serve as both a lesson and an opportunity. My presence, unassertive on the surface but vigilant beneath, created a counterbalance to her narrative, a silent reminder that while she spoke for me. Now, the understanding of every nuance, every unspoken intention, rested entirely with me. The sunlight shifted again, shadows lengthening across the floor, and I noted the subtle ways Claire adjusted to the environment, the manner in which she maintained composure, her micro-expressions betraying slight impatience or triumph, and I understood that this careful attention, this deliberate non-engagement, was itself an expression of quiet authority, a preparation for actions that would unfold once the session concluded. Claire paused briefly, her fingers lightly drumming on the armrest of her chair, and I noticed the slight narrowing of her eyes as if she was measuring my reaction. I remained still, absorbing the cadence of her speech, noting how she emphasized certain words, how her pauses often betrayed the confidence she projected. The sunlight had shifted again, slanting across the polished wooden floor, illuminating the subtle dust motes suspended in the air, each one moving slowly in the warm light, unnoticed by anyone except me. I traced the edge of my notebook, feeling the textured cover beneath my fingertips, each small detail grounding me in the present while my mind catalogued every nuance of the conversation. Claire spoke about the distribution of assets, referencing figures, dates, and prior conversations, and I found myself quietly cross-checking each statement with my memory of past events, understanding where she attempted to influence perception, where she framed information to position herself advantageously. The lawyer interjected occasionally, clarifying procedural points, and I observed the interaction, noting the subtle deference in Claire's tone and posture, the way she adjusted her body to match his attention, subtly asserting control without overt confrontation. I considered how often in family gatherings she had exerted similar influence, the quiet ways she had dominated conversations, redirected attention, or introduced suggestions that seemed innocuous but carried underlying weight. I noted the parallels now in this formal environment, recognizing the strategies employed to shape outcomes. Each answer she provided before I could respond added to the map forming in my mind, the pathways of influence, the indicators of intent. I allowed her to continue uninterrupted, understanding that patience and observation would yield insight beyond immediate speech. The room remained calm, almost serene in its order, yet charged with underlying tension, a tension that only I seemed fully aware of as I catalogued body language, tone, and content simultaneously. My breathing was steady, a quiet rhythm that contrasted with the subtle undercurrents of anxiety that might have affected a less experienced observer. I considered my own history, the lessons learned through decades of family dynamics, the understanding that listening carefully, even while appearing passive, provided a strategic advantage. Every phrase from Claire revealed more than the words themselves, the small emphases, the quick glances, the subtle shifts in expression, all contributing to a detailed picture of her intentions. I recorded each silently, mentally filing the details in preparation for later action, knowing that comprehension and clarity were as powerful as immediate confrontation. The session continued in measured cadence, Claire speaking confidently, the lawyer noting procedural facts, and I continued to listen, an attentive observer in control of my own perception, fully aware that each moment, while dominated by her voice, also served to strengthen my understanding of the patterns, motives, and strategies at play. The conversation shifted briefly as the lawyer reviewed a thick folder of papers, the soft scratch of his pen against the pad marking time as I observed quietly, noting how each movement and gesture carried intent. Claire leaned forward, her hands folded neatly on the desk, delivering her points with precision, yet I paid close attention to what was unsaid, the gaps in her narrative, the subtle hesitations that betrayed uncertainty beneath the practiced confidence. I remembered other meetings, past discussions at family gatherings where she had subtly redirected attention, gently nudged conversations, manipulated context, and I recognized the same patterns unfolding now, only magnified by the formal setting and the weight of legal consequence. My gaze swept across the room, noting the faint reflection of sunlight on the glass tabletop, the way the shadows shifted, marking the slow passage of time, while I remained composed, silent, absorbing the rhythm and flow of her words. Each response from Claire was catalogued, mentally tagged, analyzed for intent, nuance, and potential leverage, while my notebook remained open but untouched, a silent witness to her performance. The lawyer occasionally looked between us, his subtle nods and measured tones acknowledging the exchange without overt intervention, his presence adding structure and authority to the proceedings. I thought of the past months since my husband's passing, how I had quietly navigated changes in household dynamics, shifts in responsibilities, and the careful observation of Claire's behavior, all of which had prepared me for this precise moment. As she spoke about allocations, preferences, and timelines, I traced the logical structure of her approach, recognizing assumptions she had made about compliance, expectations, and the limits of my engagement. My mind catalogued alternatives, pathways for action, and potential responses, even as my body remained calm and composed, an exterior of serenity masking the active processing within. I noted the subtle indicators of her confidence, the slight tilt of her head, the emphasis on certain phrases, and the patterns in her speech that repeated familiar strategies from prior interactions. With each answer she provided before I could speak, I silently reinforced my understanding of her approach, storing this intelligence carefully, knowing that my next steps would be informed by patience, observation, and careful timing. The sunlight continued to shift across the room, illuminating the fine textures of the desk, the polished floor, and the attentive posture of both the lawyer and Claire, while I remained still, absorbing, listening, noting, and quietly preparing the mental map that would guide my response when the moment arrived. Every phrase she delivered, every confident assertion, every carefully chosen word contributed to the growing clarity in my mind, a comprehensive understanding of influence, intent, and strategy, while outwardly I maintained the quiet presence of a composed observer, fully aware that silence could be more powerful than any immediate reaction. As the session continued, Claire's tone remained steady, methodical, and deliberate, yet I detected subtle cracks in her composure, tiny shifts in posture, brief hesitations that hinted at the effort required to maintain the facade of absolute control. I observed the way she leaned slightly forward when presenting a point, the careful modulation of her voice to appear confident and knowledgeable, and I silently noted these cues in my mind, understanding that even the most polished exterior carried traces of human limitation. My hands rested calmly on my lap, my fingers tracing the subtle lines of the leather chair, a tactile anchor as my attention scanned every motion, every expression, cataloging the nuances of timing, emphasis, and delivery. The sunlight streaming through the blinds now fell across the floor in long, golden strips, accentuating the quiet elegance of the office while also highlighting the intensity of the interaction within it. The lawyer shifted papers, made soft murmurs of acknowledgement, and I watched the interplay of attention and authority, recognizing how Claire's control depended on the subtle alignment of perception and procedure. A fragile balance that could be influenced through careful observation. My thoughts drifted momentarily to prior family gatherings, moments when similar tactics had been employed with casual precision, the same ways she had diverted attention, subtly altered the narrative, and positioned herself as the authoritative voice, all while I maintained quiet composure. Each memory reinforced my awareness of patterns, allowing me to anticipate possible moves, to recognize the cues embedded in gestures, glances, and phrasing. Claire's answers to the lawyer's questions continued, flowing with confidence, yet each repetition, each carefully structured explanation revealed not only her assumptions but also her vulnerabilities, insights that were invisible to anyone not fully attentive. I remained passive in form but active in perception, internalizing every detail, noting the rhythm of conversation, the interplay between spoken words and silent communication, the unspoken hierarchy established by her repeated assertions. The air in the office carried a quiet stillness, broken only by the soft shuffle of papers and the occasional tick of the clock, creating a measured cadence that underscored the tension and focus of the meeting. I considered the options that patience afforded me, the strategic advantage of observing fully before responding, and the growing clarity that came from mapping every nuance, every emphasis, every hesitation. My eyes returned to Claire, catching the fleeting flicker of thought behind her calm expression, a subtle acknowledgement that she was projecting strength and control, yet in that projection lay evidence of intention, which I now held firmly in my awareness. I let the conversation unfold, maintaining the poise and stillness that had become my quiet shield, my attentive observation serving as both repository and preparation, ensuring that every word, every gesture, every calculated pause was registered, analyzed, and understood, ready to inform the decisions that would follow when the time was right, granting me the power that comes not from speaking first but from listening fully and understanding completely. The meeting progressed with a steady rhythm, Claire continuing to assert her points with precision, each statement flowing seamlessly into the next, yet I noted the subtle cues that revealed the pressure behind her composure. My hands rested lightly on my lap, tracing the outline of my notebook as I absorbed every inflection, every strategic pause, and every small gesture, cataloging the patterns of influence she wielded so effortlessly. The sunlight had moved further across the room, highlighting the fine grain of the wooden floor, the polished surface of the desk, and the delicate shadows cast by the blinds, grounding me in the environment even as my attention remained fully attuned to the nuances of interaction. Claire referenced past conversations, previous decisions, and family expectations, framing them in a way that suggested inevitability and authority, yet each carefully chosen word also revealed assumptions, priorities, and the subtle ways she attempted to direct perception. I remained quiet, allowing her to speak fully, understanding that my observation and internal documentation were themselves forms of quiet authority, a strategic positioning that required no immediate action. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and made notes, occasionally asking for clarifications, and I observed the interplay of attention, authority, and influence, noting how Claire navigated both the formal procedural structure and the unspoken dynamics between us. I thought back to decades of family interactions, the subtle negotiations and power shifts that had always been part of our household, recognizing that these moments were a continuation, magnified by legal significance and formality. Each phrase Claire uttered, each confident assertion, each carefully placed emphasis contributed to the broader map I was constructing in my mind, identifying intentions, testing assumptions, and marking opportunities for measured response. I noted the micro-expressions, the shifts in tone, the pacing of her delivery, all revealing both strength and vulnerability, awareness and overconfidence, in ways that would guide my later actions. I allowed the session to unfold naturally, my silence serving as both a shield and a lens through which every detail was examined and recorded. As the conversation continued, I felt the quiet reinforcement of patience, the power inherent in listening attentively, in observing without immediate reaction, in understanding every facet of the interaction fully before considering any next step. The room remained calm, the air filled with the soft hum of the ventilation system and the low rustle of papers, yet beneath the surface, each observation I made contributed to a growing clarity, a comprehensive understanding of control, influence, and intent, with the knowledge that this awareness would shape the strategic choices I would make once the discussion concluded, demonstrating that strength and authority do not always need to be voiced but can reside fully in careful attention and deliberate, composed presence.